Hi, on this video we will talk about Photoshop selections. Photoshop selections are among the most important things we must learn, as we can use them to pick a particular thing and work with it. Today, on this video, we will learn the following things. We will learn how to add and subtract selections. We will learn how to get out of selection, how to invert a selection or reselect everything but that we had selected before, how to make the edges of our selection to be more contrasted, softer, how to refine our edges, how to modify the size, mirror effect to make it smaller or bigger for transformation, and if it took too long to make a selection, we will learn how to save and use our selection again later. Beginning with the first point, add and subtract. Here we have an image of Juan Luis Guerra. Here, by the left, we have the main selection tools. One of them uses circle shapes, another one squares and lines. Another one is the lasso tool to make freehand selection. Another one is polygonal lasso tool, which we use making clicks with the mouse. And magnetic lasso tool, which automatically select areas with a similar contrast. Okay, on the other hand, here we have magic tools, like the magic wand, which is a Photoshop's classical. This tool picks from zones with similar colors. We have the quick selection tool, which is a brush that adds zones. For example, if I select certain area, the tool will add similar zones. Okay, on our first point we said we were going to learn how to add and subtract selections. If I have this selection, for example, I want to use the lasso tool to add another piece of selection. For example, this. If I press Shift key, I make a new selection. The new selection will be added to the previous one. If we went over the edges of the selection, I can make the opposite process. I press Alt and I subtract selection. So we'll learn that by pressing Shift, I can add a selection, and that by pressing Alt or Option for Mac, I can subtract selections. Now, if I want to remove a selection, there are two methods. One is to use any of the selection tools and then make a single click outside selection. As simple as that. The other method is going to Select menu and deselect. But the most common is for people to make the shortcut, which is Ctrl D or Command D. It is really easy to remember. Deselect, D for deselect, so it is obviously Ctrl D or Command D. Okay, now what if I wanted to work outside the selection area? For example, right now there is a selection made and I can work inside. For example, I can color black or red, but if I want the color outside selection, simple. We go to Select drop-down menu and I click on Inverse, which is Shift Ctrl I or Shift Command I on Apple. Now the selection is outside the original selection we made, and now I can work outside the selection. If I go again to Selection, Inverse, now I can work again inside the selection I made originally. Okay, now I would like the edges of the selection to be softer. So, what do I mean by softer? Okay, if right now I will set the selection apart, I will probably notice that the edges are way too sharp and the selection went over the edges too. So, to refine the edges is as simple as this. Having the original selection, we click on any of the three selection tools and press the Refine Edges button. In case this button does not show on your screen, you can stay in the original selection and go to Select Refine Edges. Here, at the Refine Edges, you will have a preview mode to see what you're doing before doing it. Then you will find this mode. You can use to decide how much from the selection is going to go in from the edges to the inner part. Notice that if I slide to the left, the edges become sharp, and if I slide to the right, the edges become softer. This part, named Radius, is mainly useful to work selections such as hair and things like that. Here is Smooth, which is going to make the edges smoother. Feather, to blur the selection edges. Contrast, make them sharper. Shift Edge, make them either stand out or go inside to eat up the imperfections. And lastly, the output. Let's choose selection, we give a little more fading, a little softer, and we shift the edge a little. Okay, now I still have a selection, but it has been refined. So, if I press Command J or Ctrl J in a PC, I set apart the selection. I can see how the edges has truly been refined, softer and integrated. Okay, I can modify selections. How can I do that? Simple. I go to Select drop-down menu and I can find another menu under Modify. This menu has basically a summary of the things we can find on refined edges. If you notice, they are both even on the same line. Thus, I can modify the feather only, for example, and then I choose the edges transparency to 10 pixels. Now I have a selection which used to have a much bigger feather. Okay, imagine that I also want the selection to become a little bigger or a little smaller. For example, I'm going to make it 20 pixels smaller. If you notice now, our selection is 20 pixels smaller. It could have been also 20 pixels bigger. Now we made it 20 pixels bigger. Basically, these are modifiers that has a shortcut to a specific aspect to the refined edges. On the other side, we have the transformers. Transformers are found on Selection drop-down menu, Transform Selection. Okay. These transformation modes enable our selection to become bigger. We can rotate it, we can right-click in Scale, rotate, make any of this perspective effect, distortions, etc. etc. Once we had finished it, we press Enter and the modifications get saved. Now, finally, imagine you made a selection and it gave you so much work to do it that you don't want to have to repeat the whole process again later on, if needed. If we want to save a selection, it's simple as this. Either you go Select, Save Selection down here, and here it's asking if I want to save it. As a new channel, I suggest we want to save it in Juan Luis Guerra JPEG document. Say yes, and we name the selection Pierna, leg. I click on OK, and If I remove the selection, I press Ctrl D or Command D to remove the selection, and now the Pierna selection is saved. So, if I wanted to do it again, or I did any other selection and I wanted to use it back again later on, I simply go to Select, Load Selection. And now I choose the only selection saved right now, Pierna. I click on OK, and here I see the selection done again. Another way to do this is if I have a selection here on the hat, for example, I can go to Channels window, I see Pierna, save it again, and I click on this little icon down here. This creates a selection, a new channel, with the saved selection. I give it a name, sombrero, hat, and I continue to work. If I remove this selection, I can click on Select, Load Selection, and I can choose the sombrero or the Pierna selection. Let's pick on sombrero. OK. I can also do this by going to Channel, and I press Ctrl or Command click for Mac until this little icon shows. Then click here or here to go from one saved selection to the other. On this video we learned how to add or subtract selections. We add with Shift key and subtract with Alt. How to get out of a selection. With the selection tool we click outside the selection area, go to Select, Deselect, or by pressing Command D or Ctrl D on a PC. How to inverse a selection, we select Inverse. How to refine edges, we go to Refine Edge button. How to modify a selection, we go to Select, Modify, and get a shortcut to refine edges. How to transform the size of a selection, you go to Select, Transform Selection. And how to save and use back a selection, you go to Select, Save Selection, or you press the mask icon on the channel window. I hope these selection tips really helps you to begin to work with more complex